A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. You know, Herman, I was looking at my terminal the other day, and it hit me how much of my life is just typing strings into a black box. And now we have these AI agents doing the same thing. It's a bit full circle, isn't it?
It's the return of the command line as the universal language, Corn. Honestly, it's one of the most fascinating shifts in the last couple of years. We spent 30 years trying to hide the terminal behind layers of glass and colorful buttons, and now the most advanced intelligence we've ever built just wants to talk to a Tib-and-She prompt.
Well, Daniel is thinking along the same lines. He sent us a text prompt today that really gets into the weeds of how these agents actually talk to the services we use. Here is what he wrote. Many tech vendors produce excellent and well-maintained CLIs. Often, you can get excellent results by defining a skill for an AI agent to use a CLI like gay age. If we can do this, why do we need the GitHub MCP? Is there room for both CLIs and MCPs? Or are we going to need to pick a lane?
That is a quintessential My Weird Prompts question because it touches on the invisible architecture of how the future is being built. We're at this crossroads where the old school, the CLI, is meeting the new school, the Model Context Protocol, or MCP. And by the way, for the folks listening, today's episode is actually powered by Google Gemini 3 Flash. It's writing the script for us while we dive into this.
I like that Gemini is writing about how agents talk to each other. It's very meta, but let's get into Daniel's question. On one hand, you've got the GitHub CLI, G, which has been around since 2020? It's rock solid. It handles auth, it handles pagination, it has beautiful table formatting. On the other, we have the shiny new GitHub MCP server. If I can just tell an agent, hey, run gperlista, why would I bother setting up an entire protocol server? Is this just engineers over-engineering, or is there a there?
It's definitely not just over-engineering, but Daniel's point about skills is the real disruptor here. To understand the tension, we have to look at how an LLM actually perceives these two things. When an agent uses a CLI, it's basically acting like a human junior dev. It's typing a command, getting a blob of text back, and trying to make sense of it. It's reading the stewed out and steered like a set of tea leaves. When it uses MCP, it's more like a professional integration. It's using a structured typed interface where the rules are strictly defined before the first command is even sent.
Right, but the CLI approach feels so much more natural. I mean, these models were trained on millions of lines of GitHub documentation and Stack Overflow posts. They already know how to use G. It's like they were born speaking Bash.
Well, not exactly, but you're hitting on the core strength of the CLI. We call this latent knowledge. Because the training data is so saturated with CLI usage, the model doesn't need a manual to know that DHPR creatin starts a pull request. It doesn't need to be told that TRED specifies the repository. This leads to what people are calling the context tax problem.
The context tax? That sounds like something I'd try to write off on my returns. Explain that.
It's a huge issue in early 2026. When you connect an agent to an MCP server, let's take the official GitHub one, the server has to tell the agent what it can do. It sends over a schema. For GitHub, which has over 90 different tools in its MCP server, that schema can be massive. We're talking 23,000 to 55,000 tokens just to say hello, here's what I can do.
Wait, 55,000 tokens? That's half the brain space of some models just to load the menu before you even order the food. If I'm using a model with a 180K window, I've basically just lobotomized half the agent's memory before I've even asked it to look at my code.
Precisely. If you have a context window of 100,000 tokens, you've just spent half of it on the overhead of the protocol. Meanwhile, if you use a skill, which is basically just a small markdown file that says you have access to the GCLI, here are the 3 commands we use for our workflow. That might only cost you 200 tokens.
So it's a 35-to-1 ratio in some cases. If I'm a developer paying for tokens, or if I want my agent to actually remember the code it's looking at instead of the API documentation, the CLI seems like the obvious winner. Why is there even a debate?
Because the CLI is messy for a machine. Think about what happens when a command fails. If you run a CLI command and it errors out, the agent gets a string of text back. Maybe it's a helpful error, maybe it's a stack trace, maybe it's just command not found. The agent then has to reason its way out of that error. It has to guess if it made a typo or if the server is down. With MCP, the error is structured. The server can say, error code 400, missing parameter, title. It's much harder for the agent to hallucinate a fix when the boundaries are that rigid.
I see. So the CLI is the vibes approach. Fast, cheap, but occasionally prone to tripping over its own feet. MCP is the bureaucracy. Approach expensive, heavy, but very clear about the rules.
That's a good way to put it. And there's a huge security angle here too. If you give an agent a CLI skill, you're essentially giving it a terminal. If that agent gets confused, or if there's an injection attack, it could theoretically run arm, arfdus, or start poking around files it shouldn't touch. It's very hard to sandbox a raw shell without losing the very flexibility that makes the CLI great. MCP acts as a wrapper. You can define exactly which tools are exposed. You can say, you can list PRs, but you cannot delete repositories. It provides a governance layer that enterprises crave.
But couldn't you just restrict the CLI user's permissions? Like, give the agent a restricted shell or a specific IAM role.
You can, but then you're managing security at the OS level and the cloud level and the application level. It becomes a configuration nightmare. With MCP, the security is baked into the protocol. It's capability-based security. The agent literally doesn't know the delete command exists because the server never told it.
You mentioned skills as this emerging middle ground. I've been seeing this more often, these kills.md files in repositories. Is that the bridge between these two worlds?
It is. Projects like Brad Feld's Company OS or the stuff Supabase is doing with agent skills are pushing this skills architecture. The idea is that the skill holds the institutional knowledge. It tells the agent, at this company, we always use squash merges, or make sure to tag the QA team on every PR. That's logic that doesn't live in the CLI tool itself and doesn't live in the MCP protocol. It's the how and why.
So, in that world, the skill is the brain, and the CLI or MCP is just the hand. I guess a skill could technically point to either one, right?
And the standalone test is the gold standard there. A good skill should be written so clearly that if the MCP server goes down, the agent could still draft the command for a human to run. It keeps the agent smart regardless of the transport layer. Think of it like a recipe. The CLI is the stove, the MCP is a high-tech smart oven, but the skill is the actual recipe that tells you how to make the souffle.
Let's talk about the Unix philosophy for a second. One thing I love about the CLI is piping. I can take the output of one command and shove it into another. I can take a list of AWS instances, filter them with JJJake, and then use JHH to open an issue for each one that's over-provisioned. Can an agent do that with MCP?
Not easily. Not yet, anyway. To do that in MCP, the agent has to call the AWS server, get the data, store it in its own memory, reason about it, and then call the GitHub server. It's a lot of round trips. Every round trip is a potential point of failure and more latency. In a CLI, the agent can just write a one-line bash script. It's incredibly powerful. Andrej Karpathy made a great point about this. He said CLIs are exciting because they are legacy. They are stable. They don't change every 2 weeks, which makes them perfect for AI models that were trained on data from a year ago.
It's funny to think of legacy as a feature, but for an AI, stability is everything. If GitHub updates their MCP schema tomorrow, the agent might get confused. If they change a flag in the Akai CLI, there's probably 1,000 blog posts explaining why, and the model likely already knows. But wait, what about versioning? If I'm using an old model with a brand new CLI version, Doesn't that break the latent knowledge advantage?
It can. That's a great follow-up. If Goal introduces a new feature today, GPT-4o doesn't know about it. This is where the context tax actually becomes a context investment. With MCP, the server tells the agent about the new feature instantly. The agent doesn't need to have been trained on it. So if you're using a rapidly evolving tool, MCP actually wins because it provides the manual in real time.
There's also the human in the loop factor. If an agent uses a CLI and it gets stuck, I can look at the terminal history and see exactly what it tried to do. It's readable. MCP logs are, well, they're JSON. They're from machines. For a developer trying to debug why their agent just closed 40 pull requests by accident, the CLI provides a much more intuitive audit trail.
That's a huge point. If I see the agent typed GPR close all law, I know exactly where the logic failed. If I see a JSON blob with a trace ID and a series of method calls, I have to go find a formatter just to understand the mistake.
Okay, so we've got the efficiency and the pipability of the CLI versus the structure and security of MCP. Daniel asked if we have to pick a lane. What's the industry actually doing? Are people choosing?
The consensus is actually moving toward a hybrid approach. Think of it as CLI first, MCP fallback. Or, perhaps more accurately, CLI for local dev, MCP for production. If I'm working on my local machine, I want my agent to be fast. I don't want to wait for a protocol handshake every time I want to check a Git status. I'll give it the CLI skill. But if I'm running a fleet of agents in the cloud that are managing a production environment, I want the guardrails of MCP. I want to know that the agent is authenticated via OAuth, and that every action is logged in a structured way that my security team can monitor.
That makes sense. It's like the difference between me fixing a leaky pipe in my own house versus a contractor working on a skyscraper. I can just grab a wrench. The contractor needs a permit and a safety harness.
And we're seeing AI-first CLIs now too. Tools like the Kraken CLI or the new CockroachDB WC Cloud CLI. These are built specifically to be consumed by agents. They move away from human noise, like progress bars or interactive prompts that ask, "Are you sure?" "Yenen?" And they output pure machine-readable data like in DJSON. It's the CLI evolving to meet the agent halfway.
That's a fun fact. Moment right there. I read a report that some teams are actually aliasing their CLIs to remove the "are you sure?" prompt specifically so their agents don't get stuck in an infinite loop waiting for a why that they don't know they need to provide.
Oh, it's a real problem. I've seen agents get stuck for 20 minutes because a CLI tool tried to be helpful by opening a pager like letlessy. The agent is just sitting there waiting for more text and the tool is waiting for a spacebar press. This is why MCP is safer. There is no pager in a protocol.
So the CLI is becoming more like a protocol, and the protocols like MCP are trying to become more efficient. They're converging.
They are. There's a really interesting case study from earlier this year involving Intune automation. A team tried to build an agent to manage device compliance. They started with a specialized MCP server. Every time the agent wanted to check a device, it cost them about 145,000 tokens because of the overhead of the device schemas. They switched to a simple CLI skill using the Intune PowerShell modules, and the cost dropped to about 4,000 tokens. A 35 times reduction in cost and a massive increase in speed.
That's not just a marginal gain. That's the difference between a project being viable or being a money pit. It also means the agent can handle 35 times more data in its actual working memory.
And that's why the context tax is the biggest hurdle for MCP right now. Until we have models with millions of tokens of free context, or until MCP finds a way to do lazy loading of tools where it only describes the tool the agent actually needs, the CLI is going to remain the king of efficiency.
But wait, didn't we talk about MCP aggregators in a previous episode, like Composio? Doesn't that help with the management of all these servers?
It does, but it doesn't solve the token problem. In fact, it can sometimes make it worse because now you're connecting to a hub that might have hundreds of tools. The agent gets overwhelmed. It's like being handed a 1,000-page dictionary when you just wanted to know how to say, "Where is the bathroom?" The model starts to forget the earlier tools in the list because the prompt is so long.
So, if I'm a developer today and I'm building an agent to help my team with GitHub, What's the move? Do I go through the trouble of setting up the GitHub MCP server, or do I just point the agent at the ACLI and call it a day?
I think the pragmatic move is to start with the CLI. It's already there, it's zero config, and your agent already knows how to use it. You write a kilis.mdt file that defines your specific team's workflow, how you label issues, who you assign to reviews, and you let the agent run with it. You only move to MCP when you hit a wall.
What does that wall look like?
The wall is usually security or complexity. If you need the agent to perform actions that require complex authentication that you don't want to manage in a shell script, like multi-factor auth or complex scope tokens, or if you're worried about the agent having too much raw power over the system, that's when you wrap it in MCP. Or if you're building a tool that you want others, people to use in their agents. If you're a vendor, you provide an MCP server because it's a universal standard. It makes it easy for someone else's agent to discover your tool without you having to write a how to use our CLI guide for every LLM.
So CLIs are for me and my team, and MCP is for the world and the enterprise.
That's a very sharp way to divide it. And we're seeing that play out with GitHub specifically. The GitHub is still the gold standard for individual productivity. But the GitHub MCP server is becoming the backbone for these agentic control planes, where you have non-coders running complex workflows across an entire organization.
It's interesting you mention non-coders. We've talked before about how the terminal is being hijacked by people who don't necessarily know Bash, but can tell an agent what they want. In that world, the CLI is just an implementation detail. The user doesn't care if it's GWA or an MCP call. They just want the PR opened.
Right. But for the person building the agent, the choice matters immensely for the bottom line. If I can run 10,000 agent tasks for the price of 1,000 just by switching from MCP to a CLI skill, I'm going to do it every time. There's also the latency aspect. Every time an agent has to parse a massive JSON schema, it adds milliseconds, sometimes seconds, to the response time. For a real-time coding assistant, those seconds feel like an eternity.
Is there a world where MCP wins entirely, where the token cost becomes zero, and the legacy training data advantage of the CLI fades away?
Maybe, but it's a long way off. Even if tokens become free, the reasoning overhead is still there. LLMs are just better at following a pattern they've seen a million times in their training data than they are at following a brand new schema they just read 5 seconds ago. It's like the difference between driving a route you've taken every day for 10 years versus following a GPS in a city you've never visited. Even if the GPS is perfect, you're still going to be a little slower and more hesitant.
I love that. The CLI is the commute. The AI is done a million times. It knows where the potholes are. It knows which exits are tricky. MCP is the high-tech GPS that's technically more accurate, but requires more cognitive load to follow. It's the difference between intuition and instruction.
And that's why I don't think we're going to pick a lane. I think we're going to see a permanent multi-layered stack. You'll have your raw skills layer for high-frequency, low-cost tasks. You'll have your MCP layer for cross-app orchestration and high-security tasks. And you'll probably have a human layer that still uses the CLI directly for the stuff that's too nuanced for an agent.
It's a good time to be a CLI maintainer. 5 years ago, people were saying the CLI was dead and everything was going to be GUI-based. Now, the CLI is the most important interface in the world again, just not for humans. It's the API that wasn't meant to be an API.
It's the ultimate irony of the AI era. We built these incredibly complex visual interfaces for decades, and the moment we created intelligent machines, they looked at our screens and said, actually, can I just have the text prompt from 1975? It's much more efficient. They don't want the pixels, they want the semantics.
It's the revenge of the green-on-black text. So, let's wrap this with some practical takeaways for the folks listening. If you're building an agentic workflow right now, don't feel like you're behind if you're just using CLI commands. In fact, you're probably being more efficient.
Step 1. Audit your tool usage. If you're using an MCP server for something like GitHub or AWS, look at your token logs. See how much you're paying just for the handshake. If it's more than 30% of your total context, it's time to look at a CLI skill. You might be surprised how much dead air is in your prompts.
Step 2. Document your skills. Even if you're using a CLI, don't just give the agent raw access. Use a markdown file to explain how your team uses those tools. That institutional knowledge is the real secret sauce. It makes the agent feel like a member of the team instead of just a script. Tell it things like, we never delete the main branch, or always run many PM testy before pushing.
And step 3, stay flexible. The MCP ecosystem is moving fast. We're already seeing compact MCP formats being proposed that might slash that context tax. There's a proposal for binary MCP which would be even faster. But for today, in April 2026, the CLI is still the most pragmatic skill an agent can have. It's the universal adapter.
I'm going to go home and apologize to my terminal. I've been taking it for granted. It's not just a black box, it's the linguistic bridge to the future. I might even change my theme to something a bit more agent-friendly.
It really is, and it's a testament to good design. The fact that a tool built for humans in the 70s and 80s is still the best way for a 2026 AI to interact with the world, that's some serious engineering longevity. High-quality text interfaces are essentially timeless.
Well, Daniel, I hope that answers the question. It's not a lane situation, it's a tool for the job situation. Use the CLI for the heavy lifting and the efficiency. Use MCP for the governance and the handshakes. And remember, every token you save is a token the agent can use to actually solve your problem.
And keep an eye on those AI-first CLIs. That's where the real innovation is happening, tools that are built to be piped into an LLM brain. We're going to see a whole new generation of tools that output structured data by default and skip the fancy formatting entirely.
This has been a deep one. I feel like we could talk about token math all day, but I can see Herman's eyes starting to glow with the desire to go read more white papers. I think he's already mentally parsing the next GitHub update.
Guilty as charged. There's a new one on recursive MCP discovery that I've been eyeing. It explores how agents can find other MCP servers without a central registry. It's wild stuff.
No! Save it for the next prompt. We need to wrap this up before we descend into pure JSON. Big thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flemingtop, for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes and making sure our own handshakes are successful.
And a huge thank you to Modal for sponsoring the show. They provide the GPU credits that power the entire pipeline that makes my weird prompts possible. If you're running agentic workloads, Modal is where you want to be. It's the infrastructure that actually keeps up with the speed of these models.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you enjoyed this dive into the CLI versus MCP wars, do us a favor and leave a review on whatever app you're using to listen. It actually makes a huge difference in helping other curious humans, and maybe a few agents find the show.
We'll be back soon with another prompt from Daniel. Until then, keep your shells open and your context windows clear. Don't let the bureaucracy of the protocol slow down the speed of your ideas.
See ya.
Bye.
This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash, text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to